Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of my colleagues, Suzanne and Greg, here at the BC Centre for Employment Excellence, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. Once again, we are very pleased that so many of you are willing to take the time out of your busy schedules to join us on this beautiful day across the province. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our organization, the CFEE was launched nearly a year ago with funding from the provincial and federal government to act as a research and knowledge sharing organization for BC employment service providers and employers. The Centre's mandate is not only to do innovative research, but also to find ways to share that knowledge and best practices with BC practitioners and employers. We invite you to check out our website where you can find information and best practices, as well as tools and resources that can support you in your various roles. In addition to a knowledge clearinghouse with nearly 200 resources related to labor market information, career development, and employment services, we also have news stories, videos, and research studies that highlight some of the great work being done by BC practitioners who serve job seekers across this province. This webinar series is one method we are using to reach out and connect with practitioners. Through this series, we plan on not only highlighting the new research by the Centre, but we will also be tapping into the knowledge and expertise within the employment services community. Last month's webinar featured Roberta Knoll and Deirdre Pickerel of Life Strategies, who highlighted the results of a study they did for us on the skill requirements of BC career practitioners. If you were unable to attend that webinar, I invite you to view the video recording of the event that we've posted on our website. Today we are pleased to feature Chris Arnold of the Provincial Networking Group in Terrace, BC, who will be speaking about networking and building relationships with employers. Chris is the Clinical Director of PNGI, one of the most successful supported employment agencies in BC for the past 2 decades. He has been working in the field of disability services for over 25 years and is regularly asked to teach and mentor in the area of specialized employment services for people with disabilities. When we started up the Centre last year, we quickly realized that Chris was someone we had to connect with, given his enthusiastic leadership, knowledge, and experience in the disability community. And honestly, when we were trying to come up with a topic together, it was hard to pin it down to just one topic that he is passionate about. And you'll definitely see that passion coming through his presentation today. But before I turn it over to Chris, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. The presentation will last approximately 45 minutes. Due to the high number of participants, we will be muting the audience throughout the presentation to ensure audio quality. We encourage you to use the questions feature on your dashboard, that's to the right of your screen, to submit any comments and questions you may have during the presentation. My colleague, Greg, will be compiling those questions, and we'll give about 10 minutes at the end for Chris to address them. We are going to be recording this webinar, and we plan on hosting it on our website again after it's finished, with further opportunities for everyone to continue the conversation there. Just want to remind you, if you do lose your internet connection, please reconnect using that link that was emailed to you. If you lose your phone connection, just redial the phone number, which appears under the Info tab, and rejoin. And now I'd like to turn it over to Chris to start the presentation.
That's great. Thanks thanks a lot, and thanks to the Centre for having me host for the webinar today. The topic that I'm going to be speaking about is on, an introduction, or it's on networking and relationship building with employers. And it's one of many topics, as was mentioned, that is an important one when you're looking at career development and employment services. And so I'm just going to hit through here to the next screen. We're going to have about 45 minutes is what I'm looking at for the presentation, and then we'll look at some time at the end for questions. And so feel free to type in those questions as we go along, and we'll address those at the end. I'm just looking at advancing to the next one here. There we go. It's working. So networking and relationship building with employers. One of the things that we started to look at within our agency very early on when we started delivering employment services back in 1994 for people with disabilities. We realized very quickly that we could be very passionate about our employees or our job seekers, people that were coming in that were looking for work through our program, and we could learn lots of information about them. But we also needed to start to be comfortable with and get good at going out and networking with some of the employers in town. And so just to get started on building relationships, this is me. This is my crazy team. Feel free to laugh. I can't hear you, but go ahead. And sometimes when we hang out a little too long in the forest, we get a little bit crazy. So this was from one of our recent team building days that we had at one of the canyons just outside of town. But when we look at the people in our agency and our group that are going out to meet with employers, one question to ask is, how do you and your job seekers look to those potential employers? How are we presenting ourselves? How do we look? How are we introducing ourselves? And what are those impressions that people are getting as far as employers when they first see us or meet us? Sometimes, regardless of what we call ourselves, whether it's career development practitioners, job developers, employment specialists, employment coordinators, we can be a bit strange looking, I think, in some cases, to a business person. And so it's important that we find ways that we can interact with business people, on a more level basis or level playing field. So we need to think to ourselves, are we those people who only show up to meet with an employer when we want something from them? That's something that employers, they often get people coming in to look for donations, for fundraisers, for various things. They'll have salespeople coming in depending on the type of business that they're operating that are trying to sell them, advertising or different products or things like that. So business people can develop some good tools or skills for sort of deflecting a lot of that, those things that come into them. So we need to find ways so that we can approach a business person or interact with them where it's not just that we're coming to them wanting something. We can have more interactions that are more mutually beneficial or on that level playing field that I was mentioning. So what I'm going to talk about today over your lunch hour is some techniques or strategies that when you hear them, you might think to yourself, well, that's not something that we typically do as career development practitioners. One of the reasons why I like to talk about non-traditional strategies is because when you're working with people who may have barriers to employment or who are really needing some extra help or assistance to land that job, a lot of times those traditional strategies may not be working for them, and that's why they're coming to us. So we very quickly at PNGI latched on to doing things differently and trying some other ways instead of just the typical ways that come to mind. So as we're going through the presentation, one thing that I'll tell you is that all of the tips or the strategies on networking and relationship building that I'm going to tell you are ones that we actually use on a regular basis at PNGI, and we've talked about with other agencies and shared, and I know other agencies have used them. So they are sort of tried and tested strategies. We know that they work, that's why we keep using them. And so hopefully we, as an industry, we can start to really recognize the importance of allowing our career development practitioners to go out there and really do this networking and relationship building and start doing some of these more non-traditional activities as legitimate parts of their job. I'll have stories for each of the examples that I give so that you can be assured that these are things we're actually using and they're actually working for us in our community. Also, as we go through the webinar, I'd encourage you to resist that temptation to think to yourself, well, that's very nice. These things work for you up in your small northern rural town of Terrace, but it would just never fly here in the big city. I've heard that before, and I have the opportunity to travel around the province and sometimes out of the province doing training workshops on different employment topics. And so I've heard that response before. But what I can tell you is that we've used these strategies with colleagues and friends and associates in other communities, including larger, more urban centers in the Lower Mainland and the interior, as well as other places in Canada. So the strategies are not just limited to rural. Also, my background is fairly heavy in the disability field. I know that we'll have other people on the call that aren't directly related to people with disabilities or job seekers with disabilities. It may be people in the multicultural area or things like that. The strategies that I'm going to talk about will apply for those other groups as well. My stories might be more related around people with disabilities, but you can take that information and interpret it into whatever your work situation is. The other thing that I like to mention is it's a good bit of information to bring out when we're talking about the strategies that we use that are successful in our community. One little tidbit of information about Terrace up here in the Northwest is that for many years we've actually had the highest unemployment rate in all of BC. The Kootenays sometimes follows close behind us, but in many cases, in fact, in a lot of instances over the last 8 to 10 years, we've had even double the unemployment rate, average unemployment rate of the province. And in fact, right now, we currently still hold that title of the highest unemployment rate in BC, despite all the things you hear about in the news, which is actually going on with all the economic activity and the transmission lines and pipelines and LNG and mining and all that sort of thing. So there is a lot of activity. However, the actual unemployment rate is still very high. One of my favorite quotes from our non-traditional guru, Denise Bissonnette, when she talks about the unemployment rate, she actually gave us some comfort and said, you know what, you don't even have to worry about the unemployment rate. If you're unemployed, it's 100%. That's all you need to worry about. So up here in Terrace, that's a bit comforting when we see in the newspaper all the time that we have this super high unemployment rate. We still get jobs and help people find jobs up here despite that. So these strategies are some of the ways that I'll talk about. So sometimes when we look at networking and we look at relationship building, you've heard the slogan, it's who you know, not what you know. Well, sometimes it really is who you know. And so there's the picture from Horton. Here's a who, if anybody's familiar with that graphic. There are endless systems in place in business and in HR practices to filter people out of the employment process. And this is one of the realities that we sort of stumbled across. A lot of the HR practices that we think are there to help people find work, in fact, may be acting as filters to keep people from making it through to who actually makes the hiring decisions. And so sometimes we need to find a contact or some way to actually get around those hurdles or those filters that might be preventing people that are on your caseload who could potentially do a good job from actually getting the opportunity to present themselves well. Have you ever, a good question to ask yourself is, have you ever unsuccessfully applied for a job that you really thought you were perfect for, even if it was a bit outside of what you had done before or your educational background or experience? You were excited about the possibility and then ended up not getting a call back. Maybe you didn't even make the short list and hear from anybody. Well, you might have been a victim of these hiring systems and these filters that I was just talking about. And so with the population that we often work with, people with disabilities or multiple barriers to employment, a lot of times these folks end up getting filtered out of this process. So even though we know we have a good, strong idea of their potential, actually being able to present that to the employer sometimes takes a few different strategies or techniques. Now, when we talk about reciprocal relationships, as good old Dr. Phil would say around relationships, they can't just be one-sided. I was hinting to that earlier by asking if we're that person that only shows up for the employer when we need them to do something for us. So relationships can't be one-sided. It's a two-way street, and both partners need to find some benefit. We need to be looking at what is it that we bring to the table. And sometimes that's not the first thing that comes to mind because people see the employers as sort of holding all the cards. They're the ones that are going to hire. They've got all the power. But in fact, there are things that we can bring to the table in that relationship that we can develop with a new business or employer. do we have the ability to engage in that reciprocal relationship with an employer? So thinking about those mutually beneficial relationships. One example could be cold calling an employer about a potential job candidate without first sort of building the relationship with the person so that you can really understand the employer's needs. If that's the case, then you're phoning up employers and saying, hey, I've got some perfect candidates for your job or for some positions within your company. If you haven't sort of taken those first steps to understand what the employer's needs are, then it's an example of that one-sidedness in the relationship. Sometimes we or our job seekers need to do some of that initial research in order to really set the groundwork for a good relationship. One of the images that I often use with people when we talk about the timing and how you time your interactions or your introductions or your contact with a new employer or business person in town is to think about the timing of those interactions. And one of the lines that I'll often use is don't propose marriage before the first date. It kind of makes sense in personal relationships when you look at it in those terms, but sometimes that's what we do as employment folks, where we go running into an employer with our brochure and our business card and our information about our agency, and we want to tell them all about us, but we haven't actually sort of stopped and looked at how can we really learn something about them. Before running off into a new business or to see a potential employer with our brochures and business cards in hand, we should think about one of the great chapters from Stephen Covey's book, the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of his important habits is titled Seek First to Understand. We have to first of all really start to learn about and understand what the business is about, what they need, and a little bit about them before we can start going in and either suggesting or implying that we really understand their business. One of the great lines in the employment industry is the line that you may even have on your own brochures or on your website, which is that line that says, we pre-screen potential candidates to meet your business needs. So it's a great line. It sounds good. How many people, thinking to yourselves, have used that line in your marketing or your advertising? A lot of times in our experience, that statement isn't always 100% true, because on one hand, you might have pre-screened the job seeker in that you spent some time learning about their qualifications, their interests, their abilities, but did you put the same amount of effort or close to that amount of effort learning about your other client, who really is the employer? It's this relationship where you actually have two people or two entities that you need to be concerned about, and that will help support that reciprocal relationship. Both the job seeker and the employer are important. So if we don't really know that the job seeker, or we can't really know that the job seeker is a perfect match for an employer unless we first understand what the employer's issues or needs are. We don't want to come off as the pushy salesperson when we're going in and really trying to make a sale, because a lot of times that will just shut employers down. You know, they're used to dealing with salespeople or people in advertising, those kinds of things, and so they will have some tools readily available to them to sort of close those doors if they start to feel that or get that impression. You'll have much more credibility if you do your research first. One example that I often give is people, because we have a storefront business in our community, we're on one of the two main streets here in Terrace in the business district, and so we do get people that will come by to drop off resumes. And I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but you know, as a business person, somebody drops off a resume at my office, and often I'll have a look at it, and at the top of the resume, it says that this particular person believes that they would be an ideal candidate for a position within my company. And as I look a little further into the resume, or I ask them if they're still there to just explain to me, you know, what my company does or what positions we hire for, in many cases they have no clue. And they were just going along down the road dropping off resumes wherever they saw an open door. So it always amazes me that someone looking for me to hire them wouldn't even take the time to Google us or look at our website or find our Facebook page. Most businesses have some kind of entity online these days, and some have a very solid entity online. So Googling places, doing some of that online research is a really quick, easy way just at the very start to get some of those basic tidbits of information. So even if somebody had done that with PNGI before they dropped a resume off with us, they would at least have an idea of the 4 main areas that our agency does business, because it's right on our front page of our website. They could, if they were more curious, they could even do more research, and they could learn a lot more about us and some of the things we're really proud of, and our philosophy, our principles. They're all on our website. We spend a lot of time developing it. So in fact, somebody coming to me with a resume to look for a job, I would be more impressed and more inclined to spend more time with them and consider them more if I saw that they had made that effort. So thinking about that scenario and sort of translating that into your role as a job developer or a career development practitioner, could you see how that fits, how that relates? So one of the images, this thermometer that you see on the screen, when we talk about timing of interactions and networking with businesses, there's a number of different degrees of job development, as I call them, and that's what I use to the thermometer to illustrate. And everything from just having a casual finger on the pulse awareness of what's going on around town, all the way up to the formal proposal at the top of the thermometer gauge. There's an attachment available through the center's website, and where you can download a one-page worksheet or informational flyer titled The Degrees of Job Development. So if you're interested, you can feel free to download that, print it off, and it has a bit of expanded information as to what I have here on the screen. So there's a bit of extra information under each of these categories. But often what happens is that I find that sometimes people will go in and they'll start right at the top of the thermometer with going in to see the business person with the brochure, introducing themselves and their role, when in fact there's a whole lot of little tasks and research types of things that can be done beforehand that can actually make your presentation or your initial contact with the employer more purposeful, because you will have learned actually about the business and some of their issues or needs, or even just what positions they have. You can find that out in many cases without going straight to the manager or the hiring person. And so that's what we talk about with timing. We want to be really aware of what's going on. We want to be aware of what issues are developing. I mean, just as one very simple example, we have weekly team meetings with our employment team here at PNGI. And I mean, one of the things that we'll talk about if it's going on around town is, any windows that have paper going up in them. So you have a business storefront window and the paper goes up in the window. What does that mean? Well, that means that something's happening. They probably don't just put it up randomly. There's probably somebody moving or renovating, moving in, moving out, expanding. There might be some construction going on. And so being curious about that and finding out, okay, who's moving in? It's almost like a challenge to see who can find out which new business is opening up in that storefront. And so just being aware of those kinds of things, all the way up to consumer questions, being a curious consumer when you're out and about in a store. Every time that you're at a checkout or paying for a service or a product, you have the ability to ask a question or two. And even though you might not be on work time on the clock, it's little bits of research that might then give you a little advantage when you start thinking about going back to develop a more formal relationship with that employer. So when we look at the strategies and some of the networking strategies that I wanted to present to you, there's a number of strategies that we often talk about. In fact, there's many. There's probably dozens of really good networking strategies. I wanted to sort of filter out, given time over the lunch hour here, I wanted to go through and just pick out sort of the top 5 non-traditional or different networking strategies that people might be interested in using, and you might be able to pick out one or two of these and in your own communities and actually put them to the test and go out and try them out. So there's certainly, as I said, more than 5 strategies. There's probably dozens. There may even be more than that. There's also some really good traditional networking strategies, and you can read about those in books or through workshops. And one example, one of my favorites of the traditional networking tips that I heard at a workshop that I went to once was just around business cards. First of all, always have business cards with you. It's important. You should try to have business cards that aren't all sort of scrunched and wrinkled up in the bottom of your coat pocket or your purse or whatever you happen to be carrying with you. So if you have a supply of business cards with you whenever you're in a potential networking opportunity, if you're at a more formalized event, the one traditional tip that I thought was great was keep your business cards in your left pocket. And why in your left pocket? Well, because often when you're meeting new people at a Chamber of Commerce lunch or a networking event, you're going to be introducing yourself, shaking hands a lot. So as you're shaking somebody's hand with your right hand, you can be sliding your left hand in to pull out the business card at the same time. So it's kind of, you look very prepared and efficient. You look very stealth when you're able to do that, and probably the person is then going to be scrambling to try to find their business card to give to you. So it's kind of a neat little traditional tip. But there's also some other strategies, and these are the ones that I'd like to talk to you about and give you some examples of today. These I would consider more non-traditional networking or relationship building strategies. So the 5 that I picked are on your screen here: the extra mile approach, strategic volunteering, purchasing power, awards and recognition, and using built-in networks and communities. And so these are the 5 that I'd like to talk to you about. So looking at each one of these and giving you a few examples, let's start with the extra mile approach. So the extra mile approach is the title that I use for, we have a number of stories that would fit into this category, but I picked out 2 that I thought I'd mention to you. The first extra mile approach story is with a business called Norbert RV in Terrace. We're on that route that the Americans love to take up to Alaska, and so we have a large RV dealership here. And one of the things, thinking about keeping your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the business community, we happened to hear through the grapevine that Norbert RV was moving. They had one location, but they had outgrown it. They wanted something a little bit better, a little larger, better access, higher visibility. So it turns out that they purchased a property right next to our Canadian Tire on the highway. Great location, great frontage on the highway. So they were going to be moving. And so when we heard that, we started to just brainstorm and try to figure out what could this mean for us? What could this mean for them? What could it mean for our job seekers? And so we started to just talk about this at our meetings and with each other around the office. So Norbert RV is a place that we didn't have anybody working. We hadn't had any real experience with them. And so we thought, well, this might open up an opportunity given that they're moving. Anybody who's moved office locations knows that it's a very chaotic and stressful situation. And so one of the things that we did was we had one of our employment staff just go out and do a little snooping around. So she went out there and she was just sort of wandering around. She went onto the property. There were some people there. She just asked a few questions like, oh, hey, when are you guys opening? You know, when's the big grand opening? I'll have to come by and have a look. And so she could tell right away, just from that initial contact, that they were very flustered and a bit panicky because their opening day was coming up pretty soon, and they still had a lot of work to do, which, of course, is often the case in situations like that. Our staff person had a new gentleman on her list that she was just in those early discovery stages with. She was just getting to know what he could do, what he couldn't do, what his interests were, you know, what his abilities were. And so we often will take people out onto sort of work experience type of situations. We call them situational assessments, where we'll actually go out and we'll sort of assess on site some of the potential that they have. So that's something we're always looking for, thinking about with new employers. Would they consider using our agency or one of the people that we're supporting in a situational assessment or work experience type of role so that we can sort of get that little extra information about them. This particular gentleman that our staff had begun working with, he was really interested in labor type work. He liked working with his hands, he liked being outside, he liked automotive things, he liked all that sort of thing. And so there were a number of things that were on his interest list that seemed to check out with Norbert RV. They had lots of vehicles, they had a lot of outdoor work, they had a shop, they did mechanics, they did things like that. So our staff person was just thinking, what could I do? What could I do at this time to sort of go the extra mile, build a little bit of rapport with this employer? And one thing that she noticed was right out front, right along the highway. You'll see in that picture right here, there's a chain link fence. Well, right on the outside of that chain link fence, before it was just all wild brush. And so when they moved in, they tried to clean it up. They built a bit of a retaining wall that looked very nice. And it looked like they had some piles of gravel that they were going to spread out just to keep the weeds down and have it look a little bit nicer on the front. But of course, they were just a bunch of piles. Nothing had happened, and obviously they didn't seem to be getting around to it. And so there was also a few other things within the yard that our staff noticed, and she started to think, you know, I think that this fellow that I'm just in the process of learning about, I bet you he could help them out with a few of these things. So she actually approached the owners and just said, hey, I'm trying to learn a bit about this fellow that I'm working with. He's going to be interested in getting a job, but I need to sort of test him out and see, you know, what his abilities are and that sort of thing. Would you be willing to have us come by? You know, maybe we can help you out by coming by before your open house and your grand opening and spread out some of this gravel and do a few things around the yard for you. There's no charge. It's part of the assessment process, and you know, it could be beneficial to both of us. So, of course, you can probably imagine what they said. They were quite happy at the idea that somebody would actually want to come and help them out, especially with just days remaining till their big grand opening. They'd already put the ads in the newspaper. There was no turning back. They needed to get things ready. So that was an example. They went out. They spent about 4 hours on an afternoon. They went out there and they got a bunch of that gravel spread out. They did some things in the lot. The guys were so happy that managed the place and the owners. They just thought it was great. Our staff managed to leave her business card, and they were appreciative. They thanked her up and down. It ended up that we didn't end up pursuing a job in that spot, but we made some excellent connections. We did end up using them again recently when we had another fellow who came in, and he was also interested in looking at a job in the labor field, working with equipment, vehicles, things like that. And that's the picture of him here you see in the forklift. And so we were able to go back and get some really good situational assessment work done on their site, which then helped us to get him a job with a local trucking company in town in their yard. And so there has been benefit for us in that respect, even though there hasn't been an actual job yet at Norbert. Of course, they're not off our radar. They're going to be on our radar, and probably they'll still remember PNGI, even though staff change. They're probably still going to remember us from that little extra mile approach that we used with them. Another one that's a great story that I often will tell is looking at Tim Hortons. And in our community, Tim Hortons, there was a time in the spring, it's that time of year when the snow is melting, and all of the street litter and garbage that's accumulated over the winter is very visible. And it's kind of a dirty time of year in April. And so with Tim Hortons, the snow was melting, and there was a lot of heat being put on the local Tim Hortons franchisee for the amount of litter that was littering the town and its curbs and its sidewalks and garden areas and things like that. Lots of Tim Hortons litter. And probably in your communities, you know, those fast food places, they produce a lot of litter. So what was happening was that there was a lot of heat going on online. There were some venues locally where people talk about customer service. There was a local online newspaper that allowed people to comment on different stories and voice their opinion, and it would get quite heated at times. Well, it was Tim Hortons' time in the spotlight, and it was a real negative spotlight. They were really getting hammered about how much litter was going on. Now, we had been into Tim Hortons. They have a couple of locations here, and this was a few years ago, we'd been in there a few times to sort of go in through the front door and try the usual approach of meeting the manager, testing the grounds, finding out about potential job opportunities. We even had individuals that specifically were interested in working at Tim Hortons, and we just hadn't had luck in our community, and so we needed to try a different way. So we thought about this. We thought about, how could we get a connection with the Tim Hortons and something that would be considered real positive. They would look positively on us. We could help them out. It could be a reciprocal relationship. What could we do? So we were brainstorming about it, and it just so happened at our team meeting, we were talking about all the heat and all the flack they were getting in the press and online for the litter situation. So it ended up developing through some conversations with our team into a proposal. We actually went into the manager at Tim Hortons and we said, hey, you know what, we've been hearing about all this heat you've been getting online. Man, that's really rough. We've got an idea for you. It happens that Earth Day is coming up, and in our community on Earth Day, there's also often a garbathon, or a day where people come out and volunteer to clean up different areas of town, often highly visible areas. So we said, well, we got an idea for you. Why don't you let us gather a group together? We know some people on the local beautification society. We've got some people from our office. We've got a couple of clients that are involved in our program. We could probably pull together a group, and we'll come out on this one particular day. We'll come out and we'll do a real good cleanup blitz around your store. And it can be some good advertising. We're usually fairly good at getting stories in the newspaper. We'll have the newspaper guys come out, send the reporter over. We'll take some pictures ourselves, and we'll just get some really good press in association with Earth Day and the Garbathon and all of that goings on. And it could be really beneficial for you. It will also give us one of the young guys that we're working with, some good, practice to come out and try his hand at some labor type work and get some experience. And so it could be beneficial for us too. So what do you think about that? Well, of course, the owner was getting enough heat that he was quite excited to try anything that would help boost up their reputation. So we went ahead with this. We arranged it. We had a bunch of different community people come out. There were actually some of the people that were complaining were even interested and willing to come out and help out, do something about it. The one young man that we were working with that we thought might be interested in working at Tim Hortons, we actually wanted to have him a little bit front and center in this whole thing, and so we invited him to come out. And in fact, we told Tim Hortons, hey, you know what? If the newspaper's coming out and there's a potential story, it would look great if we could have this young man, if he had your uniform on so that your logo would be in the pictures. We make sure that it's very visible, and the employer's like, oh, that's a great idea. So yeah, bring him by. We'll get a uniform and get him all suited up. So we did that. He was in the picture that went in the story in the paper. It was great visibility for Tim Hortons. They got their area cleaned up. It only took a couple of hours with lots of willing volunteers, and it was that little extra mile relationship building approach. Remember I said we'd had a hard time getting any momentum with Tim Hortons in the past with the other ways that we'd tried? Well, now we actually went in after we were all done. The owner was so happy. It looked great. Everybody did a good job. And we said, well, he's already got the uniform. If you let it go back to the way it was after today, people are going to see right through that, and they're not going to be real happy, and you could be in the same boat again. So you really should have somebody that can help you out and maintain this and keep things up. And while he's at it, I'm sure there's some things within the store that you could probably use some extra help with the summer season coming. And so we sort of framed it like that, and we had the manager or owner of the store basically throwing the doors open for us to come in, and the young man in the picture ended up getting a job at Tim Hortons as a result of that. Now, looking at strategic volunteering, there's a lot of businesses that have special projects, or they have a particular charity or group that they fundraise for. Think about some of the businesses that you frequent. Often the banks, for example, CIBC up here, they really do a lot of fundraising for breast cancer. Another one of the banks does fundraising and barbecues for the MS Society. Staples, they do a lot of supporting of Special Olympics. So it's not uncommon for businesses to be involved in volunteering or charitable work. So if we're looking at networking or developing relationships with business people, we need to look at how we can be where they are. And so volunteering might provide an opportunity. So thinking about it within your agency, if you're an employment agency, a Work BC location or a community employment agency, do you have any special volunteer projects that you do as a staff team? And if you don't, why not think of some? Throw it out to the group. Probably there's individual staff people that are very in tune or in touch or passionate about a specific volunteer opportunity. So think about some of the other businesses in town that you might have on your hit list or you might be wanting to target to build a relationship with. Do you know what their volunteer projects are? Do you know what charities they support? Do you know what different projects they work on with their staff? And if you find that out, then you could strategically volunteer in some similar areas. So Rotary is an example that often comes to mind around volunteering and business. Rotary, it can be a lot of work and a lot of time commitment. We actually went for many years without joining Rotary simply because we were worried about how much time it was going to take out of our already busy schedules. But a couple of years ago, my business partner, Marg, kind of bit the bullet and got invited by our accountant to Rotary and became an official Rotary member. Now, she really likes it. She's enjoying being part of Rotary, but it does take a lot of time. It's a lot of lunches, it's a lot of fundraising and meeting, but it's some really great connections with business owners and business managers as well. So that's one of the more obvious ones you might think of. But another one might be volunteer committee work. If you think about committees that you might be on, you know, things like the Winter Games Committee, the Measuring Up Committee, those kinds of things. The Garbathon that I mentioned, our Beautification Society, this is our team at PNGI, and we wore matching T-shirts just to make sure everybody noticed us, and we had employees' kids and their dog and some of the folks that are involved in our program come out to do some strategic volunteering, and we make connections with employers. Another one is purchasing power, and I'm going to be talking a little bit faster just because I'm cognizant of the time. I've got a big clock right in front of me here. And the purchasing power initiative that we did in our community was we wanted to find something sort of manageable and simple that we could do that would have an impact around this idea of purchasing power. What we did is we looked at our population, 12,000 people at the time. This was a few years ago. I think we've added a few extras. But we looked at the 3 or 4 main agencies in town that provide services to people with disabilities. And we got them to pool some figures. At an interagency meeting, we said, you know what, we'd like to really highlight the purchasing power of the community living or social service industry in our community. Because a lot of times I don't think that that's necessarily taken seriously. We actually have a lot of purchasing power. We were actually quite surprised that in our population of 12,000, we had 320 FTEs, full-time employees, within the 4 main agencies that hired people to work with people with disabilities. The annual payroll was $8.4 million. And when we looked a little further, we asked 3 of the 4 agencies, how much does just your agency spend on office supplies? $28,000 a year. We had 2 office supply stores in town. Neither of them had a person working through our program. Now we do have one of the 2 has hired somebody through their program, our Speedy Printers. Insurance, we looked at $37,000 between 3 agencies is spent on insurance. We had 5 or 6 insurance agencies, and none of them had hired somebody through our program. Now we have one of the employment or insurance agencies in town has hired somebody. Vehicle repair, $23,000. Again, we had 4 or 5 dealerships. None of them had hired somebody through our program when we started this project, and now we have 2 of the dealerships in town that have hired people. Building repair, we're still working on RONA and early building centers. to get somebody in there. Awards and recognition. We find opportunities or ways to nominate businesses that we work for or that we work with for different awards. Who doesn't love getting an award? We worked with one of the young men, the young fellow that got hired at Tim Hortons, actually. His private school was very supportive when we looked at, he was still in school and he was starting to work. And so they were really supportive of the job development process. They helped him with transportation. They did all kinds of things. So we heard about an Inclusive Schools Award, and we ended up nominating them, and they won. It meant 2 trips to Vancouver. The premier at the time delivered the award. It was a really neat thing for them. It didn't take much work on our part, but built some really good rapport and a relationship with the people on the board of that private school, which are a lot of the business people in town. There's also Chamber of Commerce Awards. There might be a Business Development Association in your area that does annual awards for various things. So think about, could you nominate somebody that either is hired through your program or that you're just starting to build that relationship with? Maybe you could include a featured story for recognition in the local paper. You know, tie it into Aboriginal Days or Learning Disability Week or Small Business Week, and pick out an employer and have one of your staff who has some flair for writing do up a story that will help to feature them. We actually just had an employer recognition luncheon. We don't do a lot of them. We've done a few over the years, but we did a big one just recently last month. This was some of the awards that we gave out there, very nice and flash. And we had a budget for it. We had it at our beautiful golf course. We had a catered lunch. We put out invitations. And we actually, in our small community, we actually had over 40 different local business people attend this luncheon. A lot of them were people that we had worked with, but of course, you know, we invited some people strategically that we haven't yet worked with or had people hired through. It created a lot of goodwill for them to see how appreciative we were with the many business people in town that we'd worked with over the years. We had awards for employers. We had awards for some of the employees that we've had hired over the years. We had long service awards. We had cool accommodation awards. We had some really neat award categories that we did. We had the mayor of Terrace, who also was a former job developer, employment counselor at our agency. He came and presented some awards. We had our MLA, who'd also been involved with our agency as a social work practicum student years ago. He came and gave out some prizes. We had door prizes. We had awards, and it was just a great event. We're really excited because tomorrow, in sort of piggybacking on this recognition awards, we're actually putting out a 4-page insert in our local newspaper, and it's going to be coming out in tomorrow's paper. And we'll have a story on the luncheon, but also on employment, on people with disabilities, diversity in the workforce, that sort of thing. And the last slide that I have for you on tips and strategies for networking is using your built-in networks. A lot of times we don't realize all the people that we know or that our coworkers know. And these pictures that you see on your screen are from a series of one-day workshops that I did around the province. And some of you might even see yourselves in the pictures. We had Kamloops, we had Victoria, we had Fort St. John. And one of the activities we do is we get a bunch of career development practitioners in the room, even coworkers that have worked together for years. And we have strips of paper, just like making those paper chains at Christmas. And on the strips of paper, we challenge each person to write down one job per slip of paper. So think about every job you've ever had in your whole life. And for some of us, that's been many. For some of other people, you've only had a few. But for every job that you've ever had in your whole life, write one job on each slip of paper. And then we build this paper chain. And so if you look at those huge links that people are wrapped up in, the paper chain, each one of those links is a different job that somebody in that group has had over the years. And a lot of times you don't even realize that you may be sitting next to a coworker every day who used to be a hairdresser, or who used to work in an automotive shop, or who used to build cabinets, or who used to do something like that. Well, they might have some insight information or be able to just have a conversation with a business person in that area. And it might be something that one of your job seekers happens to be looking for. So think about your coworkers, your colleagues, the people that you know. We exploit employees' spouses and family members. We think about our neighbors. We think about our job seeker. We have a meeting with their network, their family, the people from their church, and we ask them about their networks, because it's all about finding those connections. Sometimes you just need an introduction to a business person to do an informational interview, or see about what kinds of jobs they hire for. Those built-in networks, you sometimes will be amazed at how many opportunities they can open up. We even had one agency, after attending the workshop, they went back and did a survey of all of their staff, because they were a multi-service agency, as some of you are as well. And so they also had residential programs, they had other community programs. So they did a company-wide survey of their employees and just asked them a couple strategic questions, like, are you attached or know any of the business people in our local community or neighborhood? Does your spouse or partner have work in a local business around town? Would they be open to giving a tour or having one of our job developers come out and talk to them about potential opportunities? And through that survey, they ended up developing 3 or 4 jobs just as a result of that survey and who people do. They're built-in networks right within their own employee group. So that was a neat example that you can do right within your own workplace. Now, I could tell stories probably for another couple hours. Anybody who knows me will probably agree with that. The challenge for me is sticking to 45 minutes. And so I think I'm a couple minutes over, but I want to make sure we have some time for questions. And what I'd like to do just in closing for this part of the webinar is to challenge you to pick just a couple of the strategies that I talked about and ask yourself, how could you make that work in your agency or your community? Is there somewhere you can volunteer? Can you talk to your coworkers about built-in networks? Can you start thinking about the degrees of job development, doing some of those initial research parts first? How about some of the other mutual activities that you could do, or recognition awards or stories? Pick 1 or 2 of those things that you think you might be able to do and give it a try and see how that works as far as relationship building. And now maybe we can turn it over for some questions.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Chris. That was a really informative presentation. I really like that tip about the business cards, and I think I'm going to be watching people out there to see if how many people are using that tip in their own approach. I just encourage people now, we have a few minutes for questions. Please use that question tool on the website to post your questions for Chris. I'm going to turn over to Greg. He's got a few here to get us started, and then around 1 o'clock we'll wrap things up.
Okay, thanks, Sean, and thanks again, Chris. Very informative presentation. I'm sure everyone was able to pull a lot of great tips and strategies from that. We just had one question at the beginning about being able to link or to the webinar or post it on their own site or your own organization's website. And absolutely, you're welcome to link to either the YouTube video itself or our blog post, which both should be up in the next couple of days from our website. You'll be able to access that through the Join the Conversation button from the cfeebc.org homepage. And then maybe just to follow up, Chris, there's a question just about sort of once you've made inroads with the company, about connecting with them and getting them working with one of your clients. Do you find that after that's happened and that maybe you have one of your clients working for a new company, is it easier to be able to work further with that company for them to continue to hire with your support, or what do you find the trends to be generally after you've made those inroads?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of ripple effects to making those inroads and building those relationships just with the employer themselves. Some of the awards we actually gave out at our recent luncheon were the repeat customer awards. And so this was for a business that had actually hired somebody through our program and then come back for more. And they actually came to us, which is kind of a great position to be in when people come to you looking for potential employees. And they would only do that because they trust in that relationship. relationship that you've built up with them. So we do have businesses that come that there will be an opportunity to work further with them down the road. Another good ripple effect, though, is that business people know business people. They interact with each other, and we've had business people that will give us a reference or a recommendation, referral to a colleague. They'll say, "Oh, you should talk to so-and-so down the road here. He's always, needing somebody for this." And so we've noticed that on a few occasions as well. And also just the perception of you in the business community amongst all of those employers. It seems to help to open doors.
Great. Another question that just came in about, back to the thermometer handout. Could you take a minute or so, Chris, to just elaborate on the consumer questions
yes,
part of that process?
Yeah. Consumer questions are great, and I try to always be ready to ask a question if I'm on the ball and I'm at the checkout. You have some purchasing power when you're handing over your money in a business. But even if you're not purchasing something, just strolling through and being a nosy customer, I don't have to walk in and have my business cards out or my name tag on my shirt. I can just be going in and be browsing, and then if the employee or the manager or somebody that happens to be there doesn't look overly busy, I might just casually say, "Oh, wow," we were just talking about this the other day, going up to the arena concession because hockey season, we're thinking about what's coming up in the next round of seasons here. And hockey season's going to be starting. We're anticipating there's going to be a lot of activity up there. So before it gets busy, might be a good time to go up as a consumer and just, go up, get a coffee from the concession stand there, and just start talking or asking some questions about, "Oh, wow, are you guys going to get super busy once hockey starts up?" That sort of thing. And so you can casually bring out some of those questions. And one of the funniest stories I had, it starts to become second nature. And when you're a job developer or employment person, you start seeing those opportunities. It's like that pop-up video show where every store you go into, all of a sudden you start seeing opportunities to ask a question, or you become very curious. One of our staff was going in for a day surgery procedure at the hospital, and she had somebody on her list that had talked about doing paper shredding. And as she was getting wheeled down to the operating room, before they gave her the sedative, they're having to navigate around all these piles of boxes. And the person that was driving her was getting visibly irritated by this. And she's like, "Man, what is this? Are you guys moving out, or what's with all these boxes?" Being a curious consumer, she just asked some questions. She ended up finding out that there was a huge backlog of paper that needed to be shredded, and they had nobody to do it, and they didn't know what they were going to do. And so, of course, she's in the OR now, and they're just about to give her the injection to put her to sleep. And she's like, "Wait, I need a business card. I need a phone number." And so being that curious consumer, wherever you go, you can pull out little questions that give you something else to ask. Now, you might not get a job that day, but it gives you something to go back and have a conversation about.
Okay, and Chris, you use the term purchasing power. Can you just clarify what exactly you mean by that?
Yeah, purchasing power, and I wish I had a bit more time to talk about this because it's so important. Think about your own agency. Talk to your bookkeeper, talk to your accountant in your own agency, and find out who you do a lot of business with. So we use a lot of purchasing power examples, like, for example, we were looking to buy flowers for our tubs that we have in front of our building, and so we went to a nursery that hired one of our job seekers. Our Christmas staff party and lunch, we always go to a business that's hired somebody through our program. And we make sure that they know that we appreciate them and that their diversity in the workplace, and we're going to patronize their business intentionally because of that. Buying gift cards for incentives, for birthdays, for employees, things like that, we try to go to places that have hired people through our agency. Our company insurance is all through that one insurance agency that now has hired somebody through our program. Even the airlines, when we have to go anywhere, we have to fly to Vancouver. There's two airlines, Air Canada and our local Hawk Air. Hawk Air has hired somebody through our program. I just booked 3 tickets this morning, and they're all on Hawk Air. So that's purchasing power, and business people understand that, and so we need to start understanding that and using that to our advantage as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris, for the clarification. We're out of time. There's actually a couple more questions that have been posted, so maybe what we'll do is we'll ask you, Chris, to actually answer those on the blog post, and then hopefully people we can keep that conversation going there. But I just want to wrap up before we start losing everyone. I'm sure everyone's got other appointments to attend to or other activities. So I just want to thank everyone for attending today. Just to remind you that we have recorded the event, and we hope to be posting it in the next day or two. You're going to be receiving an email with a link to that presentation and video. Unfortunately, we found that our system doesn't record those of you who are connecting by phone as having attended. So you may receive an email saying that we're sorry that you were unable to attend. But if you'd like confirmation of your attendance, maybe for credit purposes, please contact us at the link in the email. And as always, we welcome your input and feedback as we continue on with this series. We would especially appreciate any suggestions you have for future webinar topics. Due to the summer holidays, we'll be taking a break next month, and we'll be returning in mid-September with our next event. Please sign up for our mailing list or keep your eyes on our website for an announcement about that event in the coming weeks. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Thank you so much, Chris, for presenting today, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon.